Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology and the murder of Stephanie Neiman. Most of you may not know what I'm talking about, especially very young people out there watching this video, but there was a very tragic, devastating murder that took place on June 3rd, 1999. And what happened was, a young woman, only 19 years old, sadly was shot 2 times and died. And they actually somebody dug like a superficial, basically shallow grave for her, like a ditch, and buried her alive. Sadly, I'm going to talk about some natal placements and transits that took place at this time that may have natal placements in her chart, and also some transits that took place at this time that may have contributed to this, sadly. Now, first, I want to talk about she was born on Stephanie Neiman was born on May 18th, 1980. Of course, I don't have a birth time for her, so I had to improvise again and do a solar sunrise chart where I put the ascendant and sun at the same position. Now, sun in Taurus, of course, on a negative side can be very stubborn and obstinate, but positively can be very loyal and steadfast. The sun in the chart, of course, our basic character, our true self. And having a Cancer moon, it shows a lot of this energy probably went into her home or family, like people she felt close to home with, maybe into some Cancerian interests like memorabilia or nostalgia. Um, this could be also something too. When I look at this, she when I got what inspired me to do this, I saw this on an episode of Dead Silent on the Investigation Discovery Network, and she stubbornly refused to say to actually tell a lie, and that ultimately led to her death and demise. Sadly, there was a guy that murdered her, a Scorpio. Um, he Clayton Lockett, he said to her, "Hey, you know, are you going to squeal me? Or are you going to snitch on me?" I don't remember exact words, but that's basically what he's conveying. And I said, are you going to keep your mouth shut?" And she's like, "No, I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna keep my mouth shut. I'm going to tell the whole. I'm going to tell the whole truth." And because she wouldn't back down, sadly, that's what I believe led to her death. But the thing about this is too, I did research a little deeper into this as well, and I noticed that Hades was on about a degree from her sun. And the thing about it is Hades is connected with like dirt, sediment. It's has to do with burials that could be very deep. Although this was a superficial, shallow one, it's still very close, to the energy that Hades can be connected with. The Hades could be tied in with the underworld of the dead or what have you. But the thing about this is, sadly, I'm wondering if this had something to do with somebody that was a criminal, that was a corrupt person, wound up doing this to her, and being buried alive. The fact that it's on her sun, the Hades is on her sun. Sun, of course, is about life. So I'm wondering if that's how that might have manifested, sadly. At the fact that she was buried and she was alive at the time of the start of that burial, given that you're talking about the sun being being the life. And also another thing I noticed too, that if I remember right, Clayton Lockett's south node. Um, South node is in. You're talking about in Taurus. And when you have you're talking about the South Node was in Taurus for him, and that was conjunct Stephanie Neiman's sun. And we were talking about the South Node in astrology can be about what we're going away from. So sadly, this is like this. Basically, this could have manifested in him playing that role and taking her life away. The fact that it's going away from life, removing her life, sadly. And that latent Taurus energy, that endurance was just not going to be there, sadly. And that's really, it's like you're going away from life. And he played, obviously that integral, that really played that main, not just an integral role, that main role in that, removing her life, sadly. Now, another thing I noticed in her chart, she's got the sun. Okay, the sun is conjunct Mercury. In Mercury is in Gemini in her chart. Sun and Taurus conjunct Mercury in Gemini. Now, thing about it is Gemini, of course, could be, Mercury and Gemini could be like the arms, the shoulders, hands, and the sun is the physical body. When she was shot, if I remember right, it said one bullet hit her shoulder, and then the other was like in her back, and I don't know if it was in the upper back or lower back. I believe it was in the back one way or another. But the thing about this is that she had the injury to the shoulder, I believe, and of course Mercury can be connected with that in Gemini. You have the Sun conjunct Mercury. Sometimes I believe that can manifest physical issues with the shoulder. Now, another thing I noticed too is that her natal Venus in Cancer was conjunct the killer's Mars in Cancer, and I believe that bullet had exited the chest, and of course, the person, the killer, Clayton Lockett, having the Mars in Cancer. Now, when you have Mars in Cancer in your chart, that could indicate that you might yourself have injuries that are related to the chest, the breast area, maybe even the stomach. But I think it could also mean that harm can be inflicted to somebody else's chest as well. That is my own take on that. And if I remember, at the gunshot, one of the gunshots exited her chest. Now, also in the solar sunrise chart, she has Leo on the cusp of the fourth house. Now, Leo by itself on the cusp of one's fourth house can indicate a dramatic ending, one that was very loud, boisterous, vociferous, one that was very dramatic again. She also had the North Node in Leo in that fourth house, and she was going through her nodal return at the time of this murder. Of course, as many of you may know, when you have a nodal return, often significant events can transpire and occur. She also had that North Node in Leo conjunct Jupiter, and Jupiter conjuncting Mars, so they're all in a series of conjunctions. That Jupiter in Virgo, it tells me, sometimes this can manifest in being very enlarging, scrupulousness, meticulousness, being proper. And it was like the fact that sadly she was so compelled to tell the truth, and doing what she felt maybe was proper ultimately led to the end of life. The fourth house is connected with the end of life, and Jupiter conjunct Mars can exacerbate issues with wounds and gunfire in some cases. And she was, of course, shot 2 times. She also had Mars in Virgo. Based on the solar sunrise time, she had Mars in Virgo at 4 degrees, which of course is a critical degree. And at the time, again, she did have the transit North Node hitting her 4th house, and again, that could all signify significant events in one's life when that does occur. And the thing about it is too, at this time as well, okay, in her chart, she had Pluto in Libra retrograde. Now, what could be the significance in that? Well, the thing about it is Pluto in Libra, I'm thinking in this particular instance, based on how she died, this is a death. Libra can be about compromise and agreements, and the fact she was very uncompromising. In fact, Pluto in Libra is retrograde. Maybe this played a role in her being very uncompromising that ultimately led to her passing. Now, at this time too, she also had transit Mars in Libra in fairly close proximity to this Pluto, which of course, to her natal Pluto, which of course can suggest a death through gunfire. Transit Mars in Libra was also at least along in conjunct Losing conjunct to her natal sun in Taurus, which of course could give a greater propensity for wounds to the physical body as a result of some volatile action in which can exclude gunfire. Mars in Libra, of course, it's in its detriment. Um, Hold on a moment, people. Now, another thing I noticed too is that looking at her chart, she also, based on doing the solar sunrise chart, of course, when you put the sun at the same spot as the ascendant, that puts Scorpio on the 7th house cusp in this instance. Now, the shooter, Clayton Lockett was likely a Scorpio sun. He was either a Scorpio or a Sagittarius sun, depending on birth time. My Cancer intuition, you could say, tells me that he was probably a Scorpio sun. I sense that there was very strong, vindictive, vengeful, even sadistic energy. This is very, to me, I could see a very negative manifestation of Scorpio energy. His birthday was November 22nd, 1975. And the thing about this too is if you have, and also if he was a sun in Scorpio, it would put it at 29 degrees, which is a critical degree. And the thing about it is also at the time of this murder, transit Chiron in Scorpio was in the 7th house of open enemies, open adversaries in Stephanie Neiman's solar sunrise chart. And this wounds could indicate wounds inflicted by a Scorpio person, Scorpio Sun, Moon, Ascendant person, or one that simply embodies those characteristics. The 7th house, again, can be connected with open adversaries, and having Scorpio on the 7th house cusp can indicate that you might actually have open enemies that could be a Scorpio Sun, Moon, or Ascendant person, or people that simply embody Scorpio characteristics. In this case, I'm thinking this was likely a Scorpio Sun person. I believe he probably almost close to 100% that his sun was in Scorpio as opposed to Sagittarius. And the thing is, the transit Chiron was very close to his sun, likely in Scorpio at the time. So this could be about him maybe going through some suffering inside, maybe as far as his life, and how people actually saw him, how he was going to shine in some people's life as far as being a murderer goes in this particular in this particular instance. So the Scorpio is the sign of death and murder. So and the thing about this too is that you're looking at in her chart too, I noticed that she has Neptune in Sagittarius, and it was retrograde. And in the solar sunrise chart, it was conjunct the 8th house cusp of death. The 8th house cusp was at 22 degrees Sagittarius. Now, some people see 22 degrees in astrology as that kill or be killed degree. You have Neptune in Sagittarius retrograde. I thought this was interesting because Neptune in astrology can be about deception. And the fact it was retrograde, it tells me that maybe she just wanted to go against being deceptive and duplicitous. She wanted to speak that veritable truth. And it did cost her her life. This was conjunct her 8th house cusp. Again, this 8th house cusp is at 22 degrees Sagittarius. She died, I believe, as a result of speaking the veritable truth by being very blunt, very tactless. And one of the rulers of that 8th house was Mars, and one of the rulers of the 8th house, of course, you're talking about, or I should say the ruler of the 8th house, which is Jupiter, because Sagittarius on the cusp of the 8th house. The ruler of that 8th house, Jupiter, was conjunct Mars, her natal Mars. So that's an indicator of a death by through gunfire, sadly. And one last thing to talk about is the fact that she also had Chiron in Taurus in her 12th house in her natal chart, and that could be some suffering due to obstinacy, stubbornness, which could be tied in to the self undoing, and it's also an indicator of some suffering that could be taking place in solitude and seclusion. That this guy that was likely a Scorpio sun likely he brought her to this desolate area and did this, try to commit this very surreptitiously, which is another uh, indicator to me that he was likely a Scorpio sun. And the thing about it is, this really, sadly, I mean, I have Chiron in the 12th house in my natal chart, and it's really not, obviously not the, I don't see it as the best placement one can have. And sadly, this was suffering that was done, and really, in a place that was fairly desolate, and again, connected with being overly stubborn and transigent, which was one's self undoing at this time. And she also had transit Saturn not far from her natal Chiron at this time. As well, which could add more despondency and sadness to this situation. So anyway, in the suffering. Anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.